Welcome to Creative Piecemeal Podcast, a podcast for creatives. I'm your host, Tammy Takeishi. Join me for compelling conversations with artists, actors, authors, musicians, and other creatives about the impact of the creative and fine arts in their lives and our ever-changing world. Thank you for listening. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Creative Piecemeal Podcast. I'm your host, Tammy Takeishi. Today, I am joined by returning guest, cellist and professor Jennifer Kloetzel. She is a graduate of the Juilliard School and a Fulbright Scholar, and has concertized throughout the United States, Europe, and Asia as a soloist and a chamber musician. She was also a founding member of the San Francisco-based Cypress String Quartet from 1996 to 2016, and she's currently teaching in California. Welcome back to the show.
Hi, Tammy. It's great to be back. I'm really excited.
You're one of the first guests to be back, so I'm just really excited to see where this goes and dig deeper into a whole bunch of questions.
Well, it's true. I felt like there were so many questions that you had posed to me that we barely scratched the surface on. So let's dig.
Yes. So before we get into that, are there any upcoming projects or recent projects since March that you want to touch on?
Gosh, I always feel like, day by day, there's so much swirling around me. There's a lot going on. So I have my Beethoven project, which continues to be. So I've recorded all of the Beethoven cello and piano music. So it's 9 pieces. So that's going to be like a 3 CD set coming out. So the production on that is continuing, and all the behind the scene things there, where you've got to like listen back and make choices, and how is it going to be presented, and who's writing the program notes on that, and a big photo shoot for the cover. That's all the stuff that people often don't think about that happens. I have been continuing to work on my Bach commissioning project. So I'm doing this sort of call and response project for that, where I'm commissioning composers to write responses to each one of the Bach cello suites. And to date, I've received 5 of the 6 commissions, just one in my inbox yesterday, which always feels kind of like Christmas morning when you're a kid, right? You get this piece and you see your name like written to and written for and dedicated to, your name at the top, and before it's even sounding on the cello, I'm already imagining what that piece is like. That's really exciting for me. So that's continuing. And then I've got a couple other recording projects I'm building on, and I'm about to head off to some festivals to teach and perform, and the world is opening up again. So that's exciting.
Wonderful. Yeah, it sounds like you've had a few busy months since we've chatted last.
It is true. Besides for finishing up school and then starting the performing again, it's just been, we all stepped out of that a little bit, and then now we're stepping back in, and it's still there. People still want to hear live music, so that's good to know.
Yes, very much. It's always wonderful to see like snippets of concerts online and being able to know that like, oh, there's a couple people in the audience already. So because it's such a different experience live.
I really think that there is no substitute for it. I mean, whether I'm attending, whether I'm playing, I played a number of concerts over the shutdown or the pandemic time where it was being videotaped for later, and it's just not the same. That relationship between the artist and the audience is key to what performance is, because you can imagine that somebody's watching out there. It's not the same as actually having the person in the room. And I've also had the experience where I've heard of a recording of a concert I've attended, and it feels really different in recorded sound than it did in person. And I think that that's part of the difference and also the magic of live performance.
Yeah, there's definitely an energy and, like you said, a relationship between the audience and the performer.
And we need the audience. So I'm happy to have them coming back.
So, of course, with you traveling, you're going to be like taking a bunch of things in your case. And I'm wondering, are you one of those people who have photos in your case? And if so, can you divulge?
It's funny because since I find that more violinists and violists have those because of the way that the cases open up. It's almost like a little display shelf. With cello cases, they're much bigger and more unwieldy, and there's not. So I actually do not have any personal items like that in my cello case. Although it is funny, it's sort of like, what do you have as your wallpaper on your computer, on your phone screen or something like that? It's a similar kind of thing. So for those, I have either pictures of my son or of some artists that I follow. So just for a little inspiration.
Yeah. Because I was going to say, I imagine you'd have to get really creative about photos in a cello case. I do notice cellists, more than other instrumentalists, will put like bumper stickers and things on their cases.
When I was growing up, I had a case that I covered in stickers of places I had been and different languages and tours and every possible thing. And then at a certain point, I decided that I wanted a fresh case. I have a very striking cello case anyway. If you look at any of my social media, you will see that it's a unique case. It's striped and brightly colored, and it needs no stickers.
Yes, yes. I love it. It seems very much you. It's full of life and energetic.
It's those are my favorite colors, and when this company BAM came out with that limited edition, and there aren't that many of those cases, and it's only for 1 year, so they do it. I was like, oh, I have to have that case. The thing that at the time, what I loved about it too was, my quartet would do a lot of outreach in schools, and the students, the younger students especially, always wanted to touch the cello, and it's you don't really want to have that happen too much. People want to pluck on things, but when I got that amazing looking case, everybody suddenly wanted to just touch the case, and I was fine with that. So also you can't hide a cello when you're carrying it around, so I was like, why not own it and have my favorite colors in there.
Yeah, it's a very like sunshiny. I like it. It's really cool.
It's funny because I've met 2 other people who have that same case since then. It's rare, but I know 2 other cellists, including a former student of mine. So I guess we're kindred spirits.
And they come up with some really interesting and beautiful cases now. Some are very high tech and have like things built into them.
Well, and this one is extremely light, which is, key when you have to carry it on your back all the time. So it's very strong and very light. And that's part of it protects the instrument. That's what I need.
Switching gears a little bit, I know that you had talked about last time a little bit about one of your favorite composers being Beethoven.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
And I'm curious, if Beethoven never existed and you had to pick another favorite composer, who would that be?
Okay. Well, that's so, it's funny because people often ask this question, who's your favorite composer? The default would be Beethoven. I would say that because, I own the life-size Beethoven cutout, and, there's Beethoven details all around me at all time. But I think that I love composers who keep my interest. So the ones that I can work on for hours and still find something interesting there, and that I'll come back after years and it's like, reconnecting with an old friend. And that could be, aside from Beethoven, it could be Bach or Brahms or Bartók, or hearing, a composer at their very best. So I think of when I listen to Mozart operas or the slow movements of Mozart piano concertos. I'm like, oh, Mozart, that's amazing. Or Haydn, some of his most clever writing is in his string quartets, right? It's so creative and fun, and the way he uses the voices. It's no wonder he's the father of that and of the symphony. And I could go on and on. So I used to say that my favorite composer is whichever one is on my music stand currently. Partly because I have found that life is a little too short to spend time working on composers who don't speak to me. So, there are occasions where you have to play something because it's been, assigned to you for a festival or something. But it's very rare that I play something that I don't completely fall in love with as I'm working on it. Some I want to come back and spend more time in, and others I'm like, okay, that was fun, and I'm going to put that away. But the things that you can really dig deep, and there are a lot of living composers as well that I love working on in that way, and I'll commission or recommission because they have that similar quality that I find in Beethoven or Bach or Bartók, where I just get pulled in, and I just want to dig and unearth the secrets behind it. How did they do that? What makes this great, right? So I know that's maybe a sidestep answer to your question, but it is a little bit like asking somebody with a bunch of kids, which one is your favorite kid? I love them all. So,
yes, I completely understand. I mean, it's hard for me to pick favorites, like whether it's a favorite rock artist or a favorite composer. I mean, it's a little easier for me to pick favorite composers than anything else. But then there's, like you said, moments in pieces where you're like, oh man, that's what makes it.
I think it also really changes throughout the course of your life, right? So that a number of years ago, I did one of those desert island disc programs where you have to, if you could only take 10 recordings with you, what would they be and why? And it was a great, it's a great premise for a show. And I had a great time choosing the music and explaining all that. And I haven't listened to that show recently, but I'm wondering how many of those would still be my favorites. Because I do think that we grow and change and things speak to us at different times in our lives, and something that I may have struggled with at one point might have huge meaning to me now. So that's life, right? We're constantly evolving. So one hopes anyway.
Yeah. That reminds me of when I first heard minimalist music, and I was like, oh boy, I cannot get on this train. And then, as I grew as a musician, it's like, okay, well, I can appreciate this artist, may not want to listen to it, but I can appreciate what they're doing for the field, or I really appreciate this piece they did in their early time in life. Harder to listen to the other things, so I was able to find balance and where my boundaries were and where I able to sort of get comfortable and get engrossed in certain types of music.
Well, I could also see, there's some music that I like to listen to, but I don't necessarily want to play, or vice versa, a little more. And some things, depending on the situation, let's say you're driving. I have friends who have what they call driving music, right? And it could be something that's more like that, or there's something that is sort of helps create the landscape of your life, almost like you were to choose a life soundtrack. There's music. I have a son who just turned 15, and when we were playing some card games the other day, and he likes to put on his Spotify playlist, and I'm always curious to see what he's listening to, because he's a pretty fine pianist and clarinetist, but he likes a really wide variety of things. And so we were talking about what it is that he likes about the music he's listening to. Most of it's not to my taste, but I'm curious as to why he likes it. So that's the cool thing.
Yeah, and speaking of driving playlists, yeah, I definitely have music that or other people's podcasts that I like to listen when I'm commuting versus if I'm just hanging out at home.
And I think things have really changed in terms of, I was, thinking about when I was growing up, that people would gather together in front of their stereos and sit and listen to the new recording that came out. And I feel like we listen to music differently now because it is on the move. It's in our ears. It's in our cars. It's in, while we're running or walking or biking or whatever, people have things go, a soundtrack going, versus the actual focus of sitting and listening to that new LP or whatever it is that used to happen, for better or for worse. I think sometimes we miss out on the quality listening experience, which is, it used to be to the people would really make sure that the stereo equipment they had, you'd go to somebody's home because they had the best equipment with the best, bass sound or whatever it is. And that's really different. Now, I know recording engineers will often take a mix they're working on out to a car stereo and pop it in there to see what it's like on those speakers, because they know that people will be listening in those kind of spaces instead of necessarily with the finest headsets. So I think that the act of listening has changed over time. And that's interesting to me, because actually taking the time to sit down and listen to a recording, start to finish, with that being your focus, that takes a lot of time, especially if you want multiple recordings. So
yeah, it does. It takes time, and it takes a lot of patience, especially in this world where we're always multitasking, doing more than one thing at once. And I'm even guilty of this, whereas when I was younger, I would get a CD or something and I would sit in my room and listen to it and just digest it. Whereas now it's like, oh, I'm going to do my email while I listen to something, or I'm going to do this XYZ in my budget. It's hard to just sit and just be with the music more than in the old days, I guess.
Well, and I think that might be why the concert experience could be more important now even than it was in the past, because it is the one period of time where in general people are not on their phones or doing, yes, we've all seen that happen too, or heard that. But when you need to just be quiet and listen and allow your mind to travel wherever it's going to go. I mean, we've all had experiences, right, in concerts where when I'm attending, not when I'm playing, I'm focused on other things when I'm playing, but when I'm attending a concert, where I'll think back to something, or I'll have an experience from listening. It's not just about what's happening on stage. It takes my mind somewhere else. I think that's interesting too. And we are sort of overly programmed with the connectivity, for better and for worse, as I like to say. I mean, with my students, I'm always saying, when I tell them to be more curious and do more research about the music they're doing, it's, they've got a computer in the palm of their hand. They can look up anything they need to know. They can start delving into it right there. They don't have to wait until the library's open to go see that. So that's the, positives and the negatives, the distraction factor versus the ability to gather information.
Yes, I would completely agree with that. And like you pointed out, it really makes live performances all that more powerful, because people are sort of forced to put their phones away, forced to slow down, and I think it's hard because some people, and maybe it's been a long time and maybe they forgot how to relax, and being in a concert setting, whether it's because they wanted to go or their friend just happened to have an extra ticket and they're like, okay, fine, in whatever capacity they get there, I think people are sort of forced to really slow down and just take a moment. I think that may be harder for some.
I think so. Well, and having that experience of doing that, is I think is really important to being human, to slowing down and sort of feeling and having that experience. And it's something that's hard to compete against as a performer. Like, some people want to be massively entertained. Some people want to be moved. What kind of concert experience am I curating? What am I creating for people to watch and listen to?
I also noticed that musical programming really gets very complex. Not only the pieces you select, but are you going to have an intermission? What order are you going to put them in? I notice anytime I would attend a concert, like an orchestra concert or something, the popular pieces, quote unquote, or well-known ones are usually the second half. And I'm like, I'm pretty sure it's because they want people to stay for the whole concert. So they put the very unusual, avant-garde, or not as popular pieces up front in the first half.
Actually, not even up front, though, right? They'll usually do an overture or something that people will want to be there for, and then they sort of have you're captured, captive audience there for the more edgy or unusual or less well-known piece. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, there's been a lot of discussion about that, and I think that the way people program concerts has really evolved over the years. If you look back at concert programs from 100 years ago and how people would present, it's very different than it is now, and I think it's constantly changing. And people are creating a different experience. Looking back to a period of time when you could see Carnegie Hall recitals where a great cellist, say, would perform just one movement of something, or just a set of short selections, or even occasionally a concerto with a piano accompaniment or something. That's just not done as much now. So it's interesting to think about how to create that experience and to know what your audience might be looking for, to sort of know where you're playing, but also to have a concept of what it is that you're trying to say in that, do you want to share new music? Do you want to introduce an audience? Are you going to talk to your audience or not? Do you, I'm a big fan of speaking to my audience about why I like something or what's interesting to me about it, to kind of direct listening. They can have their own experience, but I'll give them something to hang on to, a little handle to pull it closer.
Have you ever been involved in any of more pop concerts lately? Do you find that that's booming, or is it still just a nice mix?
I have not been involved too much in that. It's not pop exactly, but I have a group that I've been playing around with, experimenting with, that's a jazz quintet. So that's one of the projects I have coming up. We want to make a recording, and it's sort of older classics, jazz songs, and the cello part almost acts as the vocal part in this, which I have a deep love of the old jazz singers. So this is sort of a fun for me. And I've also been learning new music that's old through that and really enjoying the process. And it's a great group of people, and it's pushing my boundaries a little bit, stepping out of the comfort zone, which is good. and I think is important. Instead of, I mean, there's a certain thing that I know that I've done for a long time and that I know how to do, but trying these other things, even if it's just stepping slightly outside and coming back, I think it enriches all of my performance experiences.
We'll definitely have to keep our ear to the ground and for when that happens.
Well, and it was, I mean, for me, that began, I was approached by some people and they said, would you be interested in trying this? And I said, I sure would. That speaks to me, and I'm nervous about it. And, they would write out some parts for me and then I would change them. And so it's not the same as, that's an entire, people are always like, oh, you're not making it up on the spot. You're not improvising there. I hope to get there at some point, but that involves a whole other type of training than what I've had. And it is good to let go a little bit of how I've been trained. It's a different world. How you hear rhythm, how you hear intonation, all of that is a little different in that world. What's that whole quote? When you stumble, make it part of the dance. There's a whole, like, what is a blue note? Or if you happen to add in something that you weren't expecting to come in, but it works. Sometimes you find something very special.
Like you said, letting go, seeing where the music takes you in the moment, and just seeing what happens. It's interesting you mentioned that, because there's a lot of improvisation in what I do for my work. And so I find that to be less intimidating than looking at something on the page where you have to play it exactly perfect. Sort of the flip side.
Well, yeah, I was going to say, whatever that means too, right? Of course, perfection is limited by by what people's perception of that can be, because a lot of people take things that are on the page and kind of make them their own. So, but maybe that's an interesting thing about stepping into this world and then coming back is feeling that. I mean, I have, Jessie Norman I have a quote of hers hanging on my office wall, which just says, somebody was asking her about, how she categorized her voice. And she said, pigeonholes are only comfortable for pigeons. And I just really love that quote, because I feel like people want to tell you who you are, what it is you do. And that's that pigeonhole, right? And I think that we are more complex than that, and many things might speak to us, and that's okay. That's actually good. And someone in my field has really taken that to the nth degree. If you look at Yo-Yo Ma, he's tried so many different things and become good at them, and really opened up all kinds of worlds. And I think that's terrific.
Yeah, and you're definitely blazing different paths and trying new things, so that's always fantastic. It's never too late to try something new, to learn something new, to just see what even hidden talents you may have that have nothing to do with music, for example. Just seeing what happens.
Well, and I believe in that, when you find something that speaks to you, that lights you up in a certain way, that's really important to kind of look at and follow if you can. Why is that speaking to me? What is it that, is it something that just gets my curiosity going? Is it something I'm good at? Is it something I just want to know more about? I am endlessly searching for new things. Not because they're new, but just because I will read a little report on something and I want to know more. Or somebody will talk about dubstep and I have no idea what that means. And so, I need to go down the rabbit hole and discover what that means. So I'm educated and aware. The next time it comes up, I'm like, oh, that's what that is.
Like you said, always be curious.
Yes, it's the way I live my life for sure. And it's also how I encourage my students to approach their work. Because, you'll find some dead ends, but I think more often than not, you'll find information that will inform all of your work and all of your performances. And I have a couple friends who call me the Google Queen, because they'll just muse aloud at something and like moments later I have information for them. But I certainly don't just choose the first thing that comes up on Wikipedia when I'm searching. I will be looking for a lot of different sources, and I'm always listening to a lot of things, whether it's podcasts or news or I'm curious in that way. So.
And that sort of rolls into the next question. Obviously, you stay curious, you stay on top of your field, you grow and you learn, but there's so many musical tips in the world. What is one that you follow almost, like die hard, and then what's one that you just are like, no, that doesn't work for me?
So this is going to get real specific to music. but I mean, to what I do. But people have a real, you have to follow. Here, this is the way you need to warm up. You should always play scales, and you should do this, that, and the other. And I start out with that, and I do believe in warming up for sure when I'm starting to play. But I often will find something grabs my attention when I'm working, or there'll be a piece of music that's nearby that I just will decide I'm going to use that to warm up instead. And then it'll take me on this different path of what my practice is going to be like that day. And so I want to listen to those voices. When we talk about a creative life, there's this, that's calling to me. Why is it calling to me? Why is that interesting? So that's something that I think, rather than having a set routine necessarily of how I always warm up, it's not that I avoid. I know people who actually will do anything to avoid, scales and etudes. That's not me. But I'll often find that I'm doing that work later on in my practice, and that's kind of the opposite of how many people believe in working on that. Some things I follow. I'm very interested in following the markings, especially if it's a composer who is very specific in their markings. I want to know why they put those markings in. So someone like Beethoven or Elgar are two composers that come to mind right away who are very specific in their markings. Some composers are a little more messy in their markings, like Dvorak, or some we don't know, like Bach. Right? We don't have his manuscripts for the suite. So that I think you can do a little more exploring, experimenting on. But the ones where they really have chosen carefully every little set, it's almost, I call them the control freak composers. They know what they want, and music notation is an imperfect thing. So why did they make that long slur? What does that mean? And can I do it? I mean, more often than not, people just start splitting things up to make it easier for themselves to play. I don't think that's why we're doing this, not to make it easier for ourselves to play, right? It's can I challenge myself to try to find what the composer means or what the story is that they're trying to tell, and then that helps me become a better technician, if you will, a better artist, I would hope, if I'm able to achieve that. And I'm always, I continue on that. I keep looking for that. So
yeah, I can definitely tell you're the kind of person who deeply thinks about music and art and the intent, and it comes across in your playing. It comes across in how you speak so passionately about what you do for a living,
Well, I think, although I say that I will follow my creative impulses, I also do believe strongly in kind of planning how you want to do your work. One of the things that I do with my students at the end of each school year, is we come up with summer goals, which I have them write down, and I write them down as well. So at the beginning of the, in the fall, we can look over and see. And it's never about look, you didn't achieve your goals. But if you've put goals on paper, there's something you can follow if you want to. There's a path. If you don't, then how do you know how to move forward? So it's the pencil is a wonderful thing because you can always erase it. Or, I have a whiteboard in my music room that's very important to me because I frequently will set new goals on there, and I always put a date next to it so I can sort of track what it is that I want to be doing. And I kind of have fun with that. I have lots of different colored pens. And when I first started doing this, I began to talk about what I called the magic of the whiteboard, which is, you start writing things down on there and you see them every day when you're practicing. And then it's like the mind starts percolating. How can I make that happen? Or as you go through, a year later, you look at it and you say, oh, wow, I did 4 of those things on there. How amazing. Now, would I have done the things on there if the whiteboard hadn't been there? Maybe. But the fact that it was always right in front of me perhaps helped with that. And it's because it's a whiteboard, I can erase it and change things too, or add to it at any time. So, and then I try to put a new date on that too, so I can sort of follow along. How long does it take for these goals to happen? Are some of them too great? Do I need help with some of the goals? Because I have a lot of big projects I would love to do, and I find myself occasionally daunted by how many of those things I don't have the skills for or can't do. At which point, bring out the notebook, which I have so many idea books. I love little notebooks. You'll find them all around my home or in my purse or whatever, with little thoughts or ideas that I have. Okay, how could I plan this out? Is there someone who might be able to help me with this? What would that cost look like? If the cost is prohibitive, is there some way I could trade something that I have that they need, or that we could build something together? There's a lot of ways to tackle a problem.
It's so important for people in the creative fields to, in whatever way that works for them, visualize their goals, whether it's with a whiteboard or in a notebook or on a calendar, or because I feel like that really helps push people along in the creative process, so that when we get stuck, we can always go back to that and be like, look, here's these things you accomplished last month, and here's something that here's something on the list you forgot about, that where can we take this? What direction can we take this in?
So something I encourage, so when I was a student and when I had the time to do this, I had a period of time when I was living in England where it was wonderful. I had this Fulbright grant that paid for all my expenses, right? And I had one lesson a week with the great master teacher. And other than that, my time was my own, which sounds great, but is also terrifying. Right? When you have that much time, how do you set your days? What do they look like? So I began to come up with plans of what worked for me, what felt good to me. And it was probably that period in my life when I practiced the most. And I recently ran across the notebooks. I had my practice notebooks because I decided to organize my time. So this is early on in my life already. I was doing this. I would start out my practice session by setting a goal of what I wanted to do. And I was specific to each day. And then I also had weekly goals, monthly goals, whatever. And I would check off what I'd done during my sessions. I would mark down the amount of time I spent that day, and then I would evaluate the practice, which is very interesting to look back at because, some days you're just the focus is just not there. I was doing an interview the other day where I was saying, my practice yesterday was terrible, and those students were really surprised by this. And I said, look, my mind was a kangaroo brain. I was bouncing all over the place, and I finally got up to put a pencil and paper next to me so I could just write down whatever was bothering me or I was struggling with, so I could deal with it later. But I just had to write it down to get it out of my head to keep practicing. So not every day can be brilliant practice time, but it's important to still do it. And that's the same in no matter what practice you do, whether it's yoga or meditation or creating art of some sort. You just want to keep doing it. You want to keep practicing doing it, even if you're having a rough day, and try to not judge yourself on that rough day either. I mean, if the rough days string together and it's a lot of them, that makes it a little harder. That's, again, when I would say, okay, I need some help with this. Who can I talk to about this? Is there do I have a role model or somebody who I'm inspired by who could help? I could say, here's what's going on. What do you think? Is there something else I should try? Rather than just giving up. I think sometimes people think, well, I'm going to go do something else for a while. And actually taking a little time off is not the worst thing either. Figure out what it is, which direction you want to move in next.
I noticed that a lot about musicians, they get to a certain point in their life, they've completed a bunch of training, and whether they've been conservatory training in Juilliard or if it's other very high training and years of private lessons, they get to this almost pivot point where it's like, okay, can I really do this for a living and handle the pressures that come with it and the demands, or do I need to find some other work to do and still appreciate my art in another way?
That's great. No, I think that's an important piece of it. I also think that trying to remember, I think it was Abraham Lincoln who said, discipline is choosing what you want now and what you want most. And I think about that. It's another inspiring quote I have in my office. But I think about that all the time because, there are times I want to do a lot of other things versus actually do the work I need to do. But I have to look at those bigger goals and say, well, is this going to lead to those or not? And that's not to say I can't prioritize fun or downtime. Actually, I have a little problem prioritizing downtime, but not fun. I think I have a whole system of work hard, celebrate hard, because the two balance each other out nicely. But and the other thing that I'm constantly, people will often talk to me about how nervous they are about a project they have going on or something. And something to remind everyone is every day you have a fresh start, but you could have your greatest performance ever at Carnegie Hall, great reviews, whatever. And the next day you get up and there's your instrument looking at you from the case saying, time to practice me again. And the same happens with your very worst day, right? You have something awful happens. The next day, the sun comes up, your instrument's there calling to you. Okay, what are we going to do today? What are we going to tackle today?
Mhm.
And it took me a little while to realize that that's so important to recognize, that each day is fresh with that. That any situation or opportunity you had, you can decide how and if you're going to learn from it, or, whether it serves you or if it doesn't serve you. Don't always believe what people say about you. Consider that source, or whether it's going to help you go the next step that you want to, who you want to become as an artist. I think that's important too.
Yeah, and that sounds like great advice, not just for standard musicians, but for all kinds of creatives, and especially people who struggle with like imposter syndrome and self-esteem. Or, for example, when I was younger, I really struggled with stage fright, like in my college years, and I debated, switching majors because of that.
Well, there are a couple of things to think about when it comes to that. One is looking into artists who've had that. What did they do? How did they live with it? I mean, I don't know this to be exactly true, but I've read reports that Pablo Casals was incredibly nervous to perform, and actually that he would apparently become sick before every performance, and yet he was Pablo Casals. How many performances is that? How did he face that every? I think it's interesting to dig into where the stage fright comes from. Is it about perfectionism? Is it about setting impossible expectations for yourself, and then kind of taking a step back and focusing on the music or the art and why you do it? One of my friends says, figure out your why. What is the story behind the music? What does it mean to you? How do you want to share that? We rarely go to concerts and want the person on stage to fail. Right? We want them to succeed. And it's thrilling when we watch them succeed. I can't think of a single concert as competitive as I have been over the course of my life where I was hoping that somebody would fail. No, I was always thrilled to watch as they succeed, and pulling for them, and watching somebody recover from something that's happened that was unexpected on stage. So those seem like easy answers for stage fright. But I think it's about taking a step back and figuring out why you're doing something, and then what you can do, like become friends with how does the stage fright affect you, or the self-esteem. What is it? Does your hand shake? Does your breathing change? Is there something you could do, you could add into your practice, breathing exercise? There's something that you can rely on in the moment to calm yourself down when you're feeling that. Also, there is no substitute for the hard work preparing for something. Stage fright often comes from not being quite as prepared as you should be for something. And so there's something, a little voice in the back of your head saying, ooh, I probably should have worked a little harder at that, or this came on sooner than I expected it to. But it also doesn't mean you don't have something valid to offer, And we all have had those experiences where there's a memory slip, or there's something that happens that's a little embarrassing, and it only lasts a second or two. It feels like an eternity when it's happening, but a second or two, and half the time people out there don't even notice. The audience doesn't notice unless you give a big response where you're showing that that's happened. So
right. Like I'm sure professionals cover things all the time. They play an F natural just a little higher than they intend, but no one would know because of the way they vibrato or something.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. It's about, I think it's, we all have the same issues that we do even even when we're younger, but we know more of how to roll with it, how to cover it, how to make it expressive, how to live with it even. And also to know that I often find that, we're so focused on what didn't go right that we forget to think about what did go right, and what did matter in what you created there. The other thing that I love about being a musician is that it is like if I'm performing for people, that's a moment in time. It's like sand art in that way, that it lasts, and then it just for that period of time, and then it's gone. That's a little different from other kind of art, I think. But whether it's writing or poetry or painting or whatever, there's a product that lasts. And yes, we have our equivalent to that is creating recordings, which to me is a completely different type of art and I love that as well. That's I think that Glenn Gould, the great pianist, used to talk about what he loved about recording and versus performing. And performing was there was a non-take-to-itiveness, as he called it, right? So you couldn't, like, if you were looking for your ideal performance of something, because that's what we're doing in a recording, right? And we can't really compare that to what it's like to perform in real time. They are, in real time, the way that you'll create a phrase or the way that something may not work quite right, but it still comes out okay, or you're moving people. That's important. But in the recording studio, we want to kind of capture something that is our very best performance, whatever that means.
We're going to switch gears, and I have this game, so to speak, where you can only keep one of the things I'm going to mention.
Okay.
It might get a little difficult. Okay, so first one, between the Bach cello suites, the Berrier cello sonatas, and the Boccherini cello sonatas, which one would you keep forever?
Certainly the Bach cello suites. I play at least a movement of a Bach cello suite every day. So that's part of my living and breathing. I need those. I love the others too, but I need that.
Do you have any favorite movements, or is that like really hard to pick?
Oh, that's really hard to pick, but because I think it really depends on the feeling of the day or what. Last night, right before, actually at about 12:30 at night, I just had to play some Bach, and I played the Sarabande of the Second Suite, which I find very deep and meaningful, and it's in D minor. D is my favorite note, especially the low D on the cello. So that one was speaking to me yesterday, but any given day, I don't know. I've been working on the Fourth Suite a lot too. So just every day, something. Actually, through the course of the pandemic, I was trying to play Bach every day too. I think we spoke about that. So yeah, have to keep those.
Excellent. I mean, they're all excellent, but yeah, I could completely understand. It's such a foundation. They're the kind of masterpieces, like you said, that you just keep coming back to and peeling the layers away.
Mm-hmm. And trying it in different ways, right? It's like that makes something interesting, whether it's a different bowing or a different where the phrase is going to. It's very flexible music. It can take a lot and still be great.
Yes, I've even heard it on other instruments, like on ukulele and on guitar, and it's like, oh, interesting. Mm-hmm. It's a whole new ballgame then.
It is. No, I love like listening to that and how it works differently. And then you think about, why did Bach choose the cello for that, or the cello-like instrument that was there, whether it was gamba or these, cello was not quite set in those days. So he was trying different things, 5 strings, different tunings. So
you had to choose between endless extra cello strings, a perfectly well-behaved music stand, or never needing a bow rehair.
Ooh, let's see.
Do they even exist?
Well, it's funny because the music stand one, I will leave that alone, because I've long ago realized that was never going to happen. And I've actually just recently switched over to an iPad, so I'm managing what that's like with a stand for that. I think it would have to be the strings. First of all, trying new strings can make a huge difference in sound. It's a very expensive thing to play around with. So if I could just have this endless supply coming towards me. I mean, long ago I love gut strings, and 2 of my strings at all times are gut on my cello. No matter what period of music I'm playing, it's the quality of sound that I love, and the response, the way they respond as I play is what I want to do. Since I was in my early 20s, I've been playing a gut string. So but it would be fun to try all the new and different ones too. So
okay, if you had to pick between keeping Baroque music, classical music, or Romantic era music, which one would it be?
Wow. Let's see. It would have to be Romantic. I think, the cello is really coming into its, Baroque. Yes, we have Bach and we have Vivaldi and the old Italian Baroque sonatas and things. Classic, there's not as much. The cello was not really as involved then, so I'd have to say Romantic. But it speaks. It just grabs your soul in a certain way. The great cello sonatas, whether it's Rachmaninoff or Chopin or Grieg, or the pieces by Schumann, or even from Beethoven, right? So
yeah, very true, very true. You sneak some Beethoven in there.
That's true. He was that crossover, right?
Okay, if you had to pick between having dinner with Rostropovich, Jacqueline Dupre, or Pablo Casals.
Oh, dinner with them. Would they be playing at all? Would I get to play cello duets with them?
Sure.
Oh, wow. Because if I was choosing between the 3 of them and the contributions, that might be something. I think it would have to be Dupre. I think that she was so vibrant and full of life. If I was going to have dinner with somebody, that of those three, I think it would be her. Although that's a really hard choice. But she studied with Rostropovich, so she can give me, a lot of tips about what he was like. So
there you go, a 2-for-1.
That's right. Am I cheating if I say that? But we shared a teacher, so we could talk about that teacher, and that'd be fun.
One other quirky question. What is the boldest meal you've ever ordered when traveling?
Well, I was in Oaxaca a couple of years ago, and they have actually all over the place, and with different things. They have grasshoppers. They eat chapulines, I think they're called, and they'll sell them on the street corners with different. They have like curried grasshoppers. They're like roasted and all that stuff. It's anyway. I had my first night in Oaxaca. I decided that I was going to try some. So crunchy. and then they put them in all of the different mole sauces and things, and it's actually quite delicious. Food in Oaxaca is wonderful. So I think second to that would be if you've ever traveled to Japan, and it's such a different time zone that you wake up at really very, very early in the morning, and the best thing to do then is to go to the early morning fish markets and just have some of the freshest sushi you could ever imagine, or sashimi you could ever imagine. And I know that's not a bold meal necessarily, but it was memorable for sure. That was as fresh as they come. That had been swimming like 15 minutes earlier, right? So
I can imagine that would be quite tasty for a person who really enjoys sushi. Well, thank you so much, Jennifer, for joining me for part 2 and, dispensing wisdom and just chatting a bit more about cello and life.
It was great to be back. Really enjoyed these conversations. And I start to forget that we're not just having a conversation, that this is actually a podcast. So hopefully some fun stuff will come out.
Excellent. Thanks again. And listeners, make sure to check the show notes for Jennifer's full bio and where to connect on social media. And as always, thanks for listening. Thanks for listening to the podcast. Like the show? Have a question? Stop by the Facebook and Instagram pages. Links are in the show notes, or search for Creative Piecemeal Podcast on social media and click follow for all the latest.